Hello, welcome to Deja Vu, the classic TV rewatch channel. Don't forget to hit the thumbs up. Also, hit subscribe and the bell notification button to see more content. Danny Meets Andy Griffith is the 20th episode of Season 7 of The Danny Thomas Show, or the 205th episode of The Danny Thomas Show. It was directed by Sheldon Leonard, written by Arthur Stander, and it aired February 15th, 1960. So Danny is pulled over by local sheriff Andy Taylor. Danny quickly says at the start here, "I'll take care of it. He picked on the wrong guy." Danny tells Andy, "Take a look at my name. See, I'm somebody." And Andy tells him, "I've never seen a car yet that wasn't being driven by somebody." Overall, this is kind of a slightly hostile verbal altercation. Danny here and in the rest of the show, he really kind of mocks Andy, especially his speech. You'll notice that. So the stop happened originally because Danny ignored a stop sign. Now, Danny says he didn't stop because there was no intersecting road for him to stop for. And 6 years ago, Andy tells him, well, actually, the council did vote to build that road, but they were only able to raise enough funds just to put up the stop sign. So Danny is not happy about this. He thinks the whole situation is a farce. And he demands right here to see the justice of the peace. Andy tells him in this scene, "I reckon you can see the justice of the peace if you want to." And Danny tells him, "Well, I reckon I want to." Andy cautions Danny against insulting the office of the justice of the peace when he meets him. And he tells him that the size of the fine is where the swelling shows. So Danny learns right here that Andy is the justice of the peace. And Danny's reaction is perfect. He's not very happy about it, and he just plays it very well. Next, we see the town drunk, Will Hoople. He sloshes into the courthouse, and he arrests himself. He arrests himself, and he locks himself in the jail. Danny then tells Andy that he's scheduled to appear on a TV show called Face to Face with Ted Parker. Andy says, if you just pay the $5 fine, you can go. Well, here is where more trouble ensues. Danny pulls a large wad of money out, and he kind of flaunts it in front of Andy. And so Andy raises the fine to $100 or 10 days in jail. And Andy states that this is not an average case, hence the increase on the fine. So Danny is outraged again, and he says he wants to expose Andy to the papers. And Andy says, we have a fine local paper called the Mayberry Gazette. Danny picks up the phone and asks Sarah to connect him to the Mayberry Gazette. And who do you know picks up the phone? Well, Andy Taylor does from the other side of the desk on another phone. Surprise, surprise, he's the editor. Both of these guys were excellent in this scene as well. Their body language really just played the skit out really nice. Danny's facial expressions really sell the whole scene, in my opinion. So Danny says, after this, he says he will take the jail sentence, but he calls Ted Parker and he tells Ted what is going on. And he arranges a live interview from the jail. So Danny brags to Andy now. He says, I have 40 million viewers. They're going to hear about the injustice happening to me. Next, we see Andy taking a tray of food from Danny, commenting that he's hardly eating any of his food the last couple days. And Danny tells him, well, I've been eating the bread and drinking the water. This is where Andy tells him, if you walk out skinnier than you came in, this is going to be really bad advertising for me, in a sarcastic manner. In the next scene, we meet Opie. He comes crying into the courthouse, and he's upset because his pet turtle, Wilford, has been killed. Opie says that he set Wilford on the ground in the ice cream parlor, and another customer, Mrs. Balford, stepped on him. Opie asks his dad to give her a fair trial and then hang her. Andy explains Opie has a lot to learn about dealing with pain and sorrow, just like he had to deal with the passing of Opie's mother. And he explains that Opie's mother passed away when Opie was a itty-bitty speck of a baby. Opie replies innocently and humorously for the scene, "Who stepped on Ma?" Opie then tells Andy that he doesn't want a new turtle because you didn't get a new ma. After this, Danny and Andy have a heartfelt moment about kids. And Danny seems to soften up, and he offers to settle the situation fairly. And Andy then, instead of settling the situation, accuses Danny of blackmail. So Danny takes it all back, he gets mad, and he storms back into the cell. So next, we see Henrietta Perkins comes into the jailhouse to speak to Andy. Now, she discusses how she cannot pay her taxes and hasn't been able to for the past 2 years due to money problems from a suit that she bought her husband to be buried in. She says that she has been charged 50 cents a day since her husband died because she didn't return the suit. So Andy then agrees to speak to Mr. Johnson, whom she rented the suit from, and eventually he agrees to refund the money to Henrietta. Well, right after this, Danny comments that Andy must not be the only Simon Legree in town. Now, we have the nationwide broadcast start. Andy is off camera, and Danny is pleading his case with the public. He speaks of the poor conditions at the courthouse, and this spurs Andy to step in view of the camera and contradict Danny's story. Mr. Parker, who's doing the interview, asks about the high fines against Danny, and Andy admits. He says, well, this is a special case, and I wanted Danny to feel the weight of the law. I wanted Danny to set a good example for the millions of people that follow him, and $5 or $10 just seemed like it meant nothing to him. And I wanted Danny to see the beautiful countryside and the people that exist between his big cities that he travels to. So Danny has a change of heart, and he apologizes on screen, and then we cut to the final scene. So Danny is preparing to leave, and Andy reminds him, well, you've still got $70 or 7 days left in jail. Angrily, Danny goes right back to the jail cell, which ends the episode. The cast of this episode was Danny Thomas as Danny Williams, Marjorie Lord as Kathy Williams, Rusty Hamer as Rusty Williams, Angela Cartwright as Linda Williams, Andy Griffith as Andy Taylor, Ronnie Howard as Opie Taylor, Frances Bavier as Henrietta Perkins, Frank Cady as the town drunk Will Hoople, Bill Baldwin as Ted Parker, Will Wright as Mr. Johnson, and Rance Howard with a brief appearance as the television director. Some things of interest. So this is the first episode, but it's also the first episode that we are introduced to Sarah, the telephone operator. Spencer Herbert and Earl Hagen, they provided the music for this episode, and they would actually end up doing the same for the Andy Griffith Show. In this episode, Andy Griffith's housekeeper is actually his Aunt Lucy. Now, Danny has a lot of names for Andy in this episode. He calls him Clem, Hayseed, Jesse James with a badge, Imitation Wyatt Earp, Backwoods Racketeer with a badge, Crooked Politician, an ornery and greedy critter, Southern Fried Politician, Tyrant, a one-man Gestapo, a rube, a hick, and also he calls him Simon Legree. Now that last one I found interesting, mostly because, and this is probably due to my age, I didn't know who Simon Legree was, but he was a brutal Louisiana plantation owner in the book Uncle Tom's Cabin. Also of note, this is not the same jailhouse setting that we'll eventually see on the show. You can see on the stage that everything is set up a little differently. The doors are in different spots. This is also one of the few times that we hear talk of Opie's mother. There's going to be another episode, I believe, which we'll hear about her, but there's not much going on with that topic. Will Wright plays Mr. Johnson here, but later we're going to know him as Ben Weaver. Frances Bavier plays Henrietta Perkins, which of course, come next episode, we will all know her as Aunt B. Andy is the sheriff, but he's also the justice of the peace, and he's the newspaper editor. The town drunk, Will Hoople, is played by Frank Cady, but he's later going to return as the town drunk in Mount Pilot. Andy's squad car is a 1959 Ford Custom 300 in this episode, instead of the Ford Galaxy that we see later. Now, I don't think that it's unfair to say, when you watch this, that Andy is a little snarkier and maybe even a little meaner in this episode. Obviously, a character development that maybe changes as they go into the Andy Griffith Show. We have no Barney, no Don Knotts in this episode, but coincidentally, for those who don't know, Don Knotts watched this pilot and then he campaigned to have Andy have a deputy. which we did eventually get. The Danny Thomas Show ran for 11 years with a total of 351 episodes. Now, the spin-offs from that show included the Andy Griffith Show, Make Room for Granddaddy, the Dick Van Dyke Show, and the Joey Bishop Show. My favorite scene in this episode is when Andy and Opie are briefly talking of death. We hear about the turtle, we hear about Opie's mother, and that these are things that have to be dealt with. And it's just a very good, heartfelt moment, and we get to see more of those come the Andy Griffith Show. My favorite line in this episode is after Danny tries telling Andy that he's somebody, and then Andy looks at the license and says, "You know, I knew it. I knew it when I saw you that I've never seen a car yet that wasn't being driven by a somebody." It was a little snarky, but overall it was just a good, humorous scene, and I just really enjoyed it. This episode left me with a reminder that pride comes before the fall. I know I definitely have a little Danny in me, where sometimes I get a little puffed up with pride, and life will kind of remind you that you need to tone it down a little bit. I hope you enjoyed this episode as much as I did. Thanks for stopping by. This has been Deja Vu, the classic TV rewatch channel. Hope to see you again soon.